Here we are again, Dave.
Alexander, how are you, mate?
All good, my man. How are you feeling this morning?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. Not too bad. Um, yeah,
Well, let's get
no,
into it.
I feel pretty good. Yourself?
No, I'm all good. It's a sunny day. I appreciate the nice weather.
Yeah, well, I think there's gonna be about 3 or 4 nice days. So
That does wonders for mood and people's well-being, I think. So,
well, you know me, I like the cold weather, mate. So
well, uh, yeah, that's true. You can't. Have you been able to do ice baths much now? Do you do that stuff at home?
nah, look, it's I've been pretty slack on the ice baths actually, mate. So um, I'm actually looking at getting like a big sort of galvanized iron tub and like putting that in the backyard and
Nice.
starting to get back into ice therapy because obviously I think a lot of things this year have sort of you know taken a little bit of a back step. So yeah, I want to get back into the swing of things. So yeah, I'm going to put a big you know a galvanized iron tub in the
That's
backyard
awesome.
and start filling that up with ice and get back to maybe doing about 3 ice baths a week. So
Do you
um,
do you know any? I know you guys got an infrared sauna at Fifth Element. Do you know anybody who does traditional saunas, installs traditional dry, like those Finnish saunas?
I mean, obviously, there's facilities that've got dry saunas. I mean, the way to look at it, like, I'm not anti dry saunas, but if you just look at it from a percentage perspective, um, with the dry sauna, like about 95% of what you're losing is just like fluids. So obviously, with that, you're losing things like electrolytes. So you're losing minerals. So about 95% is that, and then about 5% is toxins.
Yeah.
So if you use like far infrared heat, okay, where you're looking at about 80%, you're losing is like water, fluids, electrolytes, and about 20% of what you're losing is like toxins. And so there's going to be a lot of byproducts in there. So things like excess amounts of calcium, excess amounts of things like uric acid, obviously things like plastics and heavy metals. Yeah, okay. So just from a clearance perspective, okay. Obviously, there's a far greater ratio there for something like far infrared heat, okay. And then there's obviously other benefits on top of that. So,
I
um,
want to go one rabbit hole at a time. I kind of just asked that out of curiosity, but
you,
um,
you you probably weren't expecting to get that response, yeah.
as usual. But Dave, for this one, obviously, like we talked about, I talked to you in depth, like back and forth through your teachings to me and then on my podcast. But with this conversation, like I told you earlier, I wanted to take it in the direction of probably something where you don't talk about as much. Like people get you talking about bloods and holistic health and deep in the weeds there. But I want to go more principled foundations with coaches and trainers. And
Yep.
starting straight up, because we certify students to be, personal trainers and coaches doing Cert 3 and 4. If you could design a curriculum to certify trainers and coaches, what would be your biggest heavy hitter principles that you would want to cover?
It's a great question, Alexander. Um, Look, fundamentally, where I think we potentially are going wrong in that realms, yeah, okay, um, is it's almost like filling in the gaps. So filling in the gaps of where we're really like missing key major points, okay. And so what I mean by this is, like obviously the whole realms of like gastrointestinal health. Now, obviously, and we've touched on this before when we've spoken in podcasts. Okay. Now, there's obviously going to be people who go, well, that's really for gastroenterologists. And I understand that point of view. Yeah. Okay. And there's the whole thing of like stay in your lane. Yeah. Okay. So, really, your lane is exercise prescription, periodization, programming. But I guess my big point here is you cannot do those things properly if you don't understand that particular topic. Now,
So you know what the crazy thing is then? Like, so many people aren't doing it properly or fully and completely then, right?
Exactly, yeah, okay, because it's a factor that because the whole thing with training, essentially what you're going to apply with this individual is stress. Okay, and so you like, this is what it comes down to. You need to understand when is the best time to apply this particular type of stress, and when is the best time to take this sort of stress away. Yeah, that's the whole thing with programming and periodization in a nutshell. Okay, now the whole thing, without understanding something like gut health, and I'm just using this as an example because there's obviously more to it than what I'm talking about here. Yeah, okay, is, let's say I've got someone with something like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, for people who don't know, okay? So you've got an overgrowth of either good bacteria or bad bacteria in the small intestine, okay? And with that bacteria is releasing all these byproducts, okay? So different types of gases, things like hydrogen ions, excess amounts of methane, yeah, okay? Now there's also other byproducts like histamine, okay? Excess lactic acid. So the only reason I'm sort of bringing this up as a bit of an example, yeah, okay, is if I go with this particular individual and start applying things like a lot of lactate capacity work, okay, a lot of lactate threshold, so a lot of glycolytic training, which would essentially mean that like high volume, okay, so high amounts of reps, and I'm not demonizing this type of training. It's necessary. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay, but with an individual who's got something like SIBO, okay, the problem is they already, because of the bacterial overgrowth, they already have an excess amounts of lactic acid, because the lactic acid is the byproduct from bacteria, okay? And that's not a bad thing because it's fuel for the gastrointestinal cells, okay? So I'm not saying that's bad, but there's higher amounts of lactic acid, yeah, okay? And you actually look at it, if we go do a whole heap of glycolytic training, conditioning work, okay, let's dumb it down even more, like HIIT training, high intensity interval training, yeah, okay? Well, of course I'm going to accumulate more lactate, correct? Okay, I'm going to accumulate more lactic acid, okay? And the reason we're doing that is to try and increase the lactate threshold. So I'm saying this is a good thing, yeah, okay? But you also got to have the ability to be able to tolerate. And you also got to have the ability to be able to clear the excess amounts of lactate out of the system, okay? And you got different forms of lactate, okay? You've got D-lactate, which essentially comes from bacteria, and you've got L-lactate, okay? You can have an accumulation of too much lactate in the system, okay? And so I guess the big point that I'm trying to get across here is someone who's got like an overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine, okay? They can have excess amounts of things like hydrogen ions. Now, the way to look at it with something like lactate, okay, essentially what lactate is like 2 pyruvate molecules and 1 hydrogen ion molecule. Okay, and essentially, and I always use this example, okay, the example would be like me doing like a bicep curl, okay? Now, essentially what makes my bicep fatigued, and once again, I'm not saying this is a bad thing, it's a good thing, okay, is the accumulation of the hydrogen ions. That's what makes my bicep fatigued, okay? Now, just to understand, if I've got an overgrowth of bacteria where the byproduct is also excess amounts of things like hydrogen ions, okay, what actually happens for those people is the accumulation of the hydrogen ions, apart from causing more damage within the gastrointestinal lining, but you will feel like more fatigued, more lethargy. Okay, you just won't have energy throughout the day. Okay, so you're just tired all the time. Yeah, okay, and so the way to look at it is, if I got this individual with this particular problem, and let's put it in perspective. Yeah, okay, how many people have IBS type symptoms? And so what I mean by that is irritable bowel syndrome. Okay, well, how many people that's growing by the day? We can easily say that. Yeah, okay, and about 70% of all IBS symptoms are actually SIBO.
Yeah.
The other 30% are things like intestinal permeability, microbiome imbalances, other gastrointestinal complications, dysbiosis, which just means inflammation in the gut. So they would make up the other 30%, but 70% is quite a high proportion. Okay, and so if we've got an individual who's got this particular problem, and then all we're doing is going, okay, so we're just going to give them a whole heap of volume.
Yeah.
We're going to give them a lot of conditioning work, a lot of HIIT training. Okay, not use the correct work to rest ratio. And that's probably a point that I'll bring up, okay, because that's really relevant. Sometimes just the fact that we're just using work to rest ratios that don't even exist in the strength and conditioning realms, okay? And for someone who's got something like SIBO, that's like a nightmare come true, okay? Because they're just accumulating so much more lactate, yeah, okay? And the problem here is they just can't clear a lot of the lactate out of the system, so it accumulates, okay? And the problem is that they're accumulating more lactate, like lactic acid, more lactate, okay? Well, that's why they feel more fatigued, more tired, more lethargy, okay? So how these people will respond to those particular training modalities is the next day they'll wake up and they'll feel like they've been hit by a Mack truck, okay? So, so they'll feel fine in the actual training session. So that's what the listeners really need to understand. During the training session, they'll feel fine, even if they've got those gastrointestinal problems. Now, why? Because fight and flight. Okay, they're just going into straight fight and flight, and that's going to supersede a lot of the bacterial complications and so forth that we're dealing with. But then you've got to deal with them later, of course. Okay, but the way to look at it is it's stress response, it's stimulation of the HPA axis. Okay, and because this is a matter of essentially for your body life and death. Okay, it's going to prioritize that axis. Okay, so of course you're still going to get through the actual training session, but how it's going to manifest is how you wake up the next day because you can't clear the lactate out of the system. Okay, now these people get excessive amounts of things like DOMS. Okay, so delayed onset muscle soreness. Yeah, okay, and so these be the people who go like they've had DOMS. Okay, they've had muscle soreness for like a couple of days. Okay, and then and how we associate that, we go, well, that's a good training session. I go, no, why can't you clear the lactate out of your system? Okay, so I'm not talking about someone that's just like a complete beginner. I'm talking about someone who's used to training in, lactate threshold, lactate capacity, these energy systems, but they just get, muscle soreness on a frequent basis. Does that make sense? Okay. So the only reason I wanted to use that as a bit of an example of what I'm talking about here, Alexander, because you can see if I can't even identify that as a problem, how can I seriously apply the right type of stress and the right type of energy system work, the right type of training for the individual?
Great point.
Okay, and so then by me just sticking to some particular system, okay, that I was taught, no matter what, even though the person's got these types of problems, would it be fair to say that by applying more HIIT training, more lactate capacity, even more things like lactate power, because he's still accumulating a lot of lactate, okay, applying these types of energy systems and this type of glycolytic training, is there a case to say that potentially I'm making their problem even worse?
Absolutely.
Yes, okay. And so if I'm making their problem worse, then we obviously know that these particular gastrointestinal issues can lead to more sinister health complications. Okay. I just want to use that as an example, okay? And so the big missing, like to answer your question, okay, one of the big gaps here, okay, is that really a lot of trainers just have no understanding really how the gastrointestinal tract works. They have really no understanding how the microbiome works, how important the microbiome is for your ability to assimilate the singular molecules that you need for brain chemicals, neurotransmitters, for your ability to modulate and regulate your hormonal balance. Okay. And so what we're taught a lot of the time in that instance is when there's hormonal dysregulation to try and use some sort of herb or some, to try and, regulate or mimic the particular hormone to try and regulate the hormones. But it's a little bit like using Band-Aids to patch up a leaky boat. Because obviously the real reason that you've got a lot of this dysregulation with your hormones is that the microbiome and the gastrointestinal lining are not aiding you in modulating it. And modulating just means to actually bring balance back to it. Okay. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. And
that's a great, really important pillar. And you've brought it in. It's so practical that training volume, training stimulus can dysregulate and make these common gut ailments that majority of people have worse, right? So that's number one, the pillar of gut. What is another pillar that you would say you would teach or encourage coaches to understand?
Well, I'm going to bring in something that I don't necessarily talk about all the time. And I think, once again, we've touched on this in podcasts, okay? And that's just around the training realms, okay? So one aspect that I just don't think gets taught, okay, is one, making sure that we have the correct building blocks in place to support the particular energy systems that we're just about to put the individual through. Okay. And once again, just giving you examples of this. Okay. So if we look at something like creatine phosphate, okay. Now creatine phosphate, we're looking at explosive and speed work here. Okay. Now someone who's a little bit more advanced, a little bit more trained. Okay. So a lactic. Okay. So that would be thing from an energy system perspective. This would be more working in things like a lactic power and a lactic capacity. Okay. All right. So shorter time frames. Yeah. Okay. And so we'd be looking in the realms for someone who's a little bit more experienced, about 0 to 10 seconds. Okay. Now, maybe for people who can't really elicit enough speed and explosiveness, they can't recruit enough motor unit pulls within the muscle surface area, maybe we're looking at about 10 to 30. Okay. But the one area that I think we're really forgetting is essentially having the building blocks for that. Okay. And so what I mean by that, what do I need for creatine phosphate? Well, strangely enough, I need creatine. Okay. So what essentially makes up creatine? Well, creatine is essentially like an amino acid byproduct. Okay. So I need amino acids to essentially help me with the production of this particular compound. Yeah. Okay. So you need things like methionine, you need arginine, you need glycine. Okay. So you need amino acids. Yeah. Okay. And the only reason I'm bringing this up, Alexander, is because I want to make it clear to all the trainers. Yeah. Okay. That you've got to make sure that this person has the right building blocks before you start to elicit these types of training systems and so forth. Yeah, okay. And I'm going to use some other examples with this. Yeah, okay. So I need creatine, and understand also potentially people with like methylation issues, like the MTHFR gene defect. Okay, these are gene mutations. There's like 50 different variants of that gene mutation. They potentially can have some issues, producing things like creatine. So that can be another added complication. That means if they're not producing enough creatine, what does creatine help with? It helps with things like muscle recovery. Yeah, okay. Just our ability to repair. Okay. Just our capacity to recover. Yeah, okay. And things like growth. Yeah, okay. Like really important for those aspects. Yeah, okay. So I need creatine, but you also need phosphate. Okay, and the way to look at it, okay, this is all to do with phosphorus, okay, which is a key like mineral. Okay, now phosphorus you can get out of things like avocado, just in case people wonder. Okay, but phosphorus is really found a lot in your cells. Okay, and you also find it within the bone as well. Yeah, okay, and so the only reason I'm sort of bringing this up as an example is I need creatine and I need phosphate, I need phosphorus. Okay, to actually help with this particular energy system. Like it's like the example that I use here, Alexander, it's not like Willy Wonka and the chocolate factory in there. So if you're not setting your clients up with the correct building blocks before you start to elicit particular training systems, all you're essentially doing, you're setting them up for failure. There's just no doubt about that. And I'll use some other examples when it comes to like movement. Yeah, okay. So to actually help with movement, like people might go, well, I've got like shoulder issues. So I've got rotator cuff problems. Okay. And what we focus on is like the movement pattern. I'm not saying that we don't need to do that. Of course we need to do that because there's important ratios when it comes to your ability, to what you can push to what you should be able to externally rotate. Probably a conversation for another time. Okay. But there's a lot of key biomechanical ratios that we need to apply in the body. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. But also, is there evidence and is there room to say that some reasons that people struggle with things like, like biomechanics is because they don't actually have enough of the building blocks. Okay. And essentially, what do I mean by that? Well, let's look at some of these key building blocks that help with things like lubrication of the joint. Okay. And so obviously we're looking like things like synovial fluid. Okay, and so people would go, well, so synovial fluid, okay, that's actually going to help with lubrication of the joint. Yes, so that will promote synovial fluid, the movement, correct? Okay, but I've also got to have the building blocks for synovial fluid. Once again, it doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Okay, now what's the building blocks that I need for synovial fluid? I need proline, I need glycine, I need glucosamine. Okay. And so where can we get a lot of these key nutrients? Okay. Obviously glycine and proline being what we call conditionally essential amino acids. Okay. Well, yes, something like glycine being a non-essential amino acid, we can get it from essential amino acids. But conditionally essential means if we really need it, we also need to get out of our food. And examples of that would be things like slow cooked meats. Okay, like things like bone broth. Okay, it's got a lot of the key building blocks. And you look at like glucosamine. Well, where can we get glucosamine? Because glucosamine is recognized a lot better coming from the food source itself. And obviously glucosamine comes out of the cartilage, from the bone. Yeah, okay, and these are the three key ingredients. And obviously, things like omega-3 fatty acids are really good here as well. Yeah, okay. But the point that I'm trying to get across is there's like a soup that we need for the synovial fluid. Hyaluronic acid. Okay, hyaluronic acid really helps with areas like the hips. Okay, lubrication through the hips. Okay. Now, once again, there's just like this soup that we need. Yeah, okay. And once again, it is glycine, it's proline, it's glucosamine, omega-3 fatty acids. Okay. And so what I basically say to people, okay, is there evidence to show that the reason that the person's struggling with mobility, they're struggling with movement, okay, is that they actually don't have enough of the building blocks to actually help them with a lot of these key compounds that we require for movement, okay? And of course, if we've got like gastrointestinal issues, a lot of the time we're struggling to assimilate a lot of these key amino acids that we need for these building blocks. Okay. And I think I mentioned this to you before. They did testing on people with IBD. So people who don't know, that's like irritable bowel disorders, irritable bowel disease. And that's things like examples would be like Crohn's disease. Yeah. Okay. Ulcerative colitis. Yeah, okay. So autoimmune conditions. Yeah, okay. And IBS complications, which is basically what I broke down before, irritable bowel syndrome. Okay. And they actually tested these people and they actually showed that these particular individuals with these types of conditions, which is a high proportion in Western society, okay, produce up to 20% less collagen. So if they produce up to 20% less collagen, how is that going to go for connective tissue? So how's it going to go for things like muscle, cartilage, bone, tendons, ligaments? Well, also your gastrointestinal lining is made from type 1 collagen and it's connective tissue as well. So how's it going to go for the little cells in your gut lining? Okay. So the point that I'm getting across, Alexander, is when I really mentor people and when I really teach them, I go, okay, let's make sure we start to get the building blocks here first, because that's going to support the movement. So what we essentially tend to do first is go, let's start doing the programming, let's start doing all the movement, okay, and we'll start to feel all that along the way, or never. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. And then they start to get all these, connective tissue issues. They start to get all these repetitive strain injuries, okay? And then, in some instances, people might say, well, I've had this rotator cuff issue, or I've had this glenohumeral joint issue. Oh, how long have you had that for? I've had that for about 6 years. And I've been seeing a physio once a week for 6 years. And I go, that's not a biomechanical issue. That's a biochemical issue, okay? Because if it was just like a rotator cuff issue, we should be able to really fix that issue within the space of a few months. If it really is just purely a biomechanical issue. Does that make sense? So, one big point that I want to get across when it comes to things like movement, mobility, energy systems, okay? And there's obviously a lot more to it than what I've spoken about, okay? But we need to put the foundations. You don't go start building a house and then you put the roof up first, yeah, okay? And you put the walls up first, okay? You've got to clear the land. You've got to put in the foundations. You've got to do the surveying. You've got to make sure it's all level. Okay. You've got to put in the foundation. And just to understand a lot of those things that I'm talking about, that's the foundations for movement. It's the foundations for energy systems. Yeah. Okay. And so what we're forgetting about when it comes to energy systems, yeah, okay, is the key building blocks that are actually required to support it. Does that make sense? That's one thing. Like I'm just saying, we're not giving trainers a lot of the education around what do we need to put in place to support these energy systems, and then just around the energy systems themselves. Yeah, okay. And so what I mean by this, yeah, okay, is a lot of the time we're not working all three major energy systems. Okay, so creatine phosphate, yeah, okay. And how can you tell when people say lactic, yeah, okay? So anaerobic, like obviously that's what I'm talking about here, speed and explosiveness, yeah, okay. Well, where people go wrong with this one, okay, a lot of the time they're trying to elicit the individual to be able to perform speed and explosiveness, and essentially, what do they not have first? They don't have strength. Okay, and like the way to look at it is strength is like the seed. Okay, everything essentially starts from that. Okay, and if you actually look at it when it comes to muscle surface area, what do we need to create first in muscle surface area? We need to create mass. Okay, and we need to create mass, and we need to create strength. Okay, and once we create that, yeah, okay, within that muscle surface area, that allows us to actually help to recruit more motor unit pools. Okay, and when we recruit more motor unit pools, now we can elicit more speed and explosiveness. Yeah. Okay, and so we just fast track things. Okay, and so what I mean by that, we don't create mass and we don't create strength. Okay, and then all of a sudden we ask people to do things like complex plyometrics, like split lunges. Okay, shock training, and shock training would be things like depth jumps. Okay. Well, just to put in perspective, okay, if I was dealing with an athlete and I was going to do complex plyometrics, so I'm not talking about basic plyometrics like tuck jumps, bounding, skipping, because that's basically where I'd start, because it's really good for the tendons and the ligaments and the talocrural joint. I'm not taking away how important it is, even for aspects like serotonin, okay, good for the knee joint, okay? So I'm not taking away how important it is, but we just skip steps. That's one of my big things, Alexander. We just skip steps and we go straight to here, okay? But if I was dealing with an athlete, okay, and basically, let's say I wanted to do some split jumps and some more complex plyometrics, they would need to be able to squat 1.5 times their body weight, which is 150% for a squat. Okay, now how many people do you reckon are doing those types of exercises and can 1.5 times? That comes from actually old school Russian, training modalities. They've applied that for such a long period of time. Yeah. Okay. Now, when it comes to something like depth jumps, okay. So for people who don't know, it's more like a triple jump movement. Yeah. Okay. Well, for something like depth jumps, which is shock training, you want to be able to do about 200%. So 2 times your body weight. Okay. And so what I'm saying is, a lot of the time in a lot of training systems, we're abiding by ideologies that don't actually really exist in strength and conditioning realms. Like, we just wouldn't apply that to an athlete. Now, what would make us think that is going to be good for general population? Okay, so the problem here is that they don't have mass, they don't have strength, and then we start doing shock training, we start doing complex plyometrics. What do you think is going to happen to these individuals? They're going to get injured. Yeah. Okay. So, and even when it comes to energy system work, yeah, okay, we just don't use the right work to rest ratio. Okay. And so when we're doing conditioning training, okay, and so within, when it comes to conditioning work, we've obviously got things like lactic, okay, which anaerobic, yeah, okay, and then within that, you've got a lactic power, you've got a lactic capacity, okay, then you've got lactate, okay, and within that, you've got lactate power, you've got lactate capacity, and you've got aerobic, and you've got aerobic power, and you've got aerobic capacity, okay. Don't worry, I'm not going to go on to those different realms and all those different work to rest ratios, but I just want to use the example of when it comes to work to rest ratio, okay? And so if we want to do more something like aerobic power or lactate capacity, okay, then basically we're going to use about a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. So if I had a work effort of about 30 seconds, then I'm going to have about 30-second rest, okay? The only reason I want to use this as a bit of an example is just understand some of the work to rest ratios that we're actually using with the general population. And it's just craziness, yeah, okay? So that would be, if we want to increase things like lactate threshold, actually help with a little bit of aerobic capacity along with this, yeah, okay? So there's benefits here, yeah, okay? Now, if it comes down to something like a lactic power, okay, creatine phosphate, more explosive, then we're going to use about a 1-to-7 work to rest ratio, okay? Now, let's look at some of the work to rest ratios that we're using in the current environment, yeah, okay? well, I'll use F45 as an example. Okay, so they're using about like 45 seconds of effort with about 20-second rest.
All the time.
So it's actually, sorry?
It's like, and that's all the I mean, I might be a bit wrong, but that's pretty much every session people go to. It's like that.
Yeah, and so just to understand, and I just use a few examples here. Yeah, okay. That work to rest ratio doesn't even really exist in the strength and conditioning realms. Okay, so why are we applying a particular work to rest ratio with general population that we don't even really use in the athletic realms? Okay, and so that's another example that I wanted to use, is that we fundamentally also aren't teaching a lot of trainers the correct application of things like work to rest ratio, and to understand not just the building blocks with the energy systems. And how I would work the energy systems generally is you want to work sort of back to front. And so what I mean by that, I'm really a lot of people just don't have good aerobic capacity. Okay, so I'm really going to work things like aerobic capacity, aerobic power, work my way back whilst I increase their strength. Okay, because whilst I'm doing that, trying to increase their aerobic capacity, which is going to help with obviously things like mitochondrial density. Yeah, okay, it also has a knock-on effect to even help with aspects like stomach acid, hydrochloric acid. Okay, because you get more byproducts like carbon dioxide. Okay. And that helps with bicarbonate, and that directly helps with things like stomach acid. So there's huge benefits there, okay? But obviously I'm getting more oxygen into the mitochondria, okay? This will pick up the person's like energy systems, help with things like heart rate variability. So if I start working it from the energy system perspective, now I can start to increase their strength, okay? And then now we're starting to create more mass, okay? We're starting to create more strength in the muscle fibers. And then, okay, that will allow me to elicit more speed and explosiveness, okay, when we start to apply more things like creatine phosphate and a lactic work, okay? But you understand what we're doing is we're taking a group of people and then we apply complex movement patterns, yeah, okay, complex plyometrics where they just don't have the strength to elicit that, okay? Where, we're using explosive movement patterns, which you'd really use in a bit more of a creatine phosphate or a lactic scenario, but they just can't elicit speed and power, okay? So I guess the big point I wanted to get across, okay, is are we really teaching trainers, are we really teaching them the right type of information around energy systems? Are we really teaching them the right information around what types of building blocks you're going to require to make sure that the individual doesn't get injured? And that's a big point that I want to get across, because what's the role if someone wants to be a great personal trainer, especially if someone wants to be a strength and conditioning coach, okay? So let's look at it in the sporting realms, okay? The role of the strength and conditioning coach is to do what? To make sure that the athlete doesn't get injured. Now, I'm not saying that that's always the same goal for general population and a personal trainer, okay? But I'm telling you, for an athlete, okay, your real goal as a trainer or a strength and conditioning coach is to make sure that athlete doesn't get injured, okay? Yeah. And so that's a big point that I want to get across. Like, are we really teaching? Do they really know and understand the energy systems properly? And do they really understand the building blocks that you require to support those energy systems?
Would you then suggest, practically speaking, for coaches, for trainers, to then start recommending and suggesting they take, a safeguard supplement, take a creatine, take an essential amino acids, and incorporate some type of slow-cooked meat and bone broth on a consistent basis? Are those pretty 3 safe recommendations you would give to trainers?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, me, there's always more to it there, Alexander. Yeah, but I would say, yes, that they're reasonably good recommendations, because a lot of the clients that we would see, they would be malnourished.
Yeah.
Okay, and the reason they're malnourished is not just because probably the quality of the food that they're consuming, okay, but also the area that assimilates it, which is obviously the gastrointestinal tract for most people, is essentially broken because of the bacterial issues they have, because of the damage to the gastrointestinal lining. And to understand, that's the high majority of people in a Western society. Yeah. Okay, and then always the argument that's going to get brought up is people are going to say, well, I don't have gastrointestinal symptoms. And you've heard me say this a million times over, okay? A lot of people with gastrointestinal problems, it doesn't necessarily manifest with gastrointestinal symptoms. Okay, a lot of the time it actually will manifest with neurological problems, energy system issues. So they just feel flat and tired all the time. Problems clearing excess amounts of things like lactic acid. Yeah, okay, these are some of the most common symptoms associated with gastrointestinal complications. Okay, so something that's going to support, the connective tissue. Okay, so maybe something like a collagen protein. Yeah, gelatin powder. The way to look at it, something like gelatin, because you got to do like 6 different types of collagen, in case people didn't know. Yeah, okay. Obviously, the major one is type 1 collagen. Your gastrointestinal lining is mainly made up of type 1 collagen. Okay, but it would be good to use something that covers all 6, and gelatin covers all 6. So you can use something like a gelatin powder. Okay, and obviously there's a lot of good gelatin powders nowadays. Okay, obviously you want to use a good quality one. Okay, so using something like that, a better quality better quality whey protein. Me, I'm really big on something like goat's whey. Okay, why? Very low in casein. Okay, it's you're not going to have the same issues, like more negligent with things like lactose. Okay, now obviously you're getting a lot of key building blocks like proline peptides. Okay, it's really high in cysteine that helps with glutathione. Okay, and people generally, because we recognize the enzymes in goat's products a lot better than we do from bovine products, so it causes a lot less like gastrointestinal issues. Okay, and potential like sensitivity responses. Yeah, okay. So something like a goat's whey. Yeah, okay. It's giving us a lot of these key building blocks that we need to support the gut lining. Okay, and cause less negative responses as some people can get with some whey proteins and so forth. Yeah, okay. So giving them some support around that. Yeah, okay. And also, just cover a lot of the key minerals. So just taking like an electrolyte. Yeah, okay. So something like a Cineplex Revive electrolytes. Yeah, okay. Which covers like the big sort of 5. There's the big 6, but they're basically taking calcium out of it. Okay. So it's covering like magnesium, involved in about 750 to 800 enzymatic processes in the body. You got like potassium, you got phosphorus. Yeah, okay. You've got sodium and you've got chloride. Yeah, okay. So you're covering a lot of those key minerals. And the way to look at it, you've got about 18 major minerals that minerals play one of the biggest roles when it comes to enzymatic process in the body. And what do I mean by that? Just like chemical reactions. Okay. So just taking a good quality electrolyte, not one that is, fluoro orange or fluoro yellow or fluoro blue. Yeah, okay. There's no river in the world or no spring water in the world that is actually fluoro blue. Yeah, okay. So natural electrolytes. Yeah, okay. And sometimes you can just use something like half a lime. Okay, because the lime is very high in like polyphenols. The polyphenols in limes will stick around your system for about 24 hours. Okay. They actually used to use lime to sterilize water. It's got anti-parasitic benefits. Yeah, okay. So you're getting a lot of those benefits, but it has a lot of minerals. So things like potassium, and you use that with like 1/4 teaspoon of Celtic sea salt. Okay. So combining those two together in warm filtered water and doing that a couple of times today to keep your electrolyte balance up. Magnesium, just because it's involved in so many different mechanisms. Yeah, okay. And you can't go wrong with magnesium, especially if you're training really hard. Okay. And I think I've definitely mentioned this to you before, Alexander, but they actually did testing on athletes, and they noticed athletes through one hard training session would deplete their serum magnesium levels, which is like plasma, okay, by tenfold. Okay. So one of the best things we could apply post-training and also at night is magnesium. Okay. Now, I'm not necessarily going to go into the realms of the different types of magnesium that are going to be better for different types of people. Yeah. Okay. But Safeguard is generally a magnesium glycinate, okay, because magnesium glycinate is just more bioavailable. So from a supplementation perspective, the uptake is generally a little bit better. But I'm not saying that other types of magnesium aren't good. Does that make sense? But I'm just saying more of a Safeguard magnesium would be a magnesium glycinate, okay, and then the minimum dosage is basically 10 milligrams per 1 kilo body weight. Okay. So if you weigh 90 kilos, then you're going to need 900 milligrams of magnesium per day. And I'm saying that's the minimum requirement. So if you're highly stressed and you're training really hard, you're going to need more magnesium than that. Okay. But also taking things like, like topical magnesiums, which generally is a magnesium sulfate, like a magnesium chloride, like a magnesium oil, spraying, 4 squirts behind each knee before you go to bed, because you generally want to try and get magnesium in through your eyeballs, up your backside. You want to try and get it in any way you can, because even if we look at it from an insulin sensitivity perspective, which is obviously going to be extremely important, not just when we're dealing with athletes, but obviously when we're dealing with general population, if you actually want to look at the best supplement when it actually comes to helping with things like insulin resistance, okay, helping with insulin sensitivity, it's magnesium. There's no doubt about that, okay? And so magnesium actually helps with the insulin receptors. So it actually helps with tyrosine kinase, okay? So you do yourself a lot of favors, like even things like gravity flotation tanks, okay? You're sitting in a whole pool of Epsom salts, okay? Having things like naturally sparkling mineral water, okay, spring water, just because that's where we used to get a lot of our magnesium, was actually from consumption and bathing in it. Things like ocean water and so forth, high in magnesium. So the only reason I'm sort of bringing these things up is just like, because they're just involved in so many key enzymatic and metabolic processes in the body, okay? Like, rather than us using like these specialized herbs and compounds, okay, like, it's so multifaceted, Alexander. And so that's the big point that I want to get across. Even like zinc, I'd say that can be a little bit more specialized, because me, I'm really big on a zinc L-carnosine, which means it's bound to an amino acid. It allows zinc to stick around longer in the gut, and zinc is a very powerful antimicrobial. So it helps with things, and zinc L-carnosine helps with things like peptic ulcers, helps with things like candida and yeast, so like fungal overgrowth, okay, which can be really detrimental to energy systems and neurological behavior, okay, negative gram bacteria. So zinc's such a powerful antimicrobial, but also it's involved in about 300 enzymatic processes that we know of. Bear in mind, okay, I always say this, when I first started learning about things like magnesium and zinc, I was told magnesium was involved in about 200 enzymatic processes. Well, guess what? Now it's up to 750 to 800. For all your listeners, okay, what would I say that is telling me? We've got no idea. We've got no idea. It just keeps on going up and up. Oh, it's involved in that. It's involved in that. So could the reality be that it's involved in way more than 750 to 800 enzymatic processes in the body when it comes to magnesium? And is there potential to say that zinc is involved in more than 300? Yeah. Of course, because we're learning more about the body, and that's fine. Yeah, okay, I'm fine with that. Yeah, okay. So we're learning more about the body, and we're learning more about how these key minerals and vitamins, their major role to actually help with chemical processes in the body. So you'd be doing yourself a huge favor to cover some of these more multifaceted aspects. Does that make sense? Okay, because they're safeguard, and what I mean by safeguard is you want to utilize things that work on both sides of the fence. There's a lot of research to support, utilizing something like creatine. Okay, there's a huge amount of research there, but once again, you don't need to use chronically high dosages. Just a small amount. Me, because obviously I'm dealing with blood markers. Okay, but you could actually see in the blood markers. Okay, because someone's creatinine levels will tend to be on the low side, where they may need actually a higher support of something like creatine. Okay. So it gets a little bit trickier with amino acids, but that's why, like what you brought up, Alexander, just covering all bases with something like an essential amino acid. Yeah, okay. Well, of course, if I've got someone who's malnourished, they've got absorption issues, using something like an essential amino acid is going to be quite safeguard, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Just to cover a lot of those essential building blocks that they need to even help with the non-essential amino acids, because the way to look at it, 20% of the human body is made up of protein. Okay, that doesn't mean it has to derive from animal proteins, but obviously amino acids are extremely important, considering 2/3 of the body is made up of water. Okay, this does put a huge emphasis on how important amino acids and protein is. Okay, the first 60% of the protein you consume goes towards healing your immune system. Okay, so we could be doing our clients a huge favor by covering a lot of these key building blocks, like the magnesium, electrolytes, zinc, okay, maybe like a vitamin C, just because it plays such a big role when it comes to your stress hormones, your catecholamines, cortisol, helping with the repair of collagen, okay, helping with the synthesis of white blood cells, so your lymphocytes, your acquired immune system, so your immune system in general, okay? And so essentially we probably want to try and get that out of the food we're consuming, but once again, we may need to support it with a more natural form of vitamin C. I like something like a Kakadu plum, okay? But also we could use like a liposomal, which is like liquid sublingual under the tongue. Hold that for 30 to 60 seconds, let it drop down the back of your throat, okay? But I guess the point I'm trying to get across is that these things just cover so many multifaceted aspects, okay? Rather than starting to, and that's what I think can really go wrong in the personal training realms, okay, in the fitness realms, is we start to get really, really specialized, okay? And yes, I'm teaching, trainers, strength and conditioning coaches, okay, but it's also even people like naturopaths. Yes, I'm teaching them about blood markers and the correlations and so forth, but this, Alexander, there's complexity there, but actually a lot of the things that I'm using to try and regulate this, okay, they're not the most complex, supplements, and they're not the most complex sort of protocols. It's using things like ice therapy, it's using things like vitamin C, okay, magnesium, okay, restorative measures like meditation and metacognition and heart math and all these types of things. Like I'm bringing it back into more multifaceted, multifaceted remedies. Yeah.
I know we talked about this, like talking about stress and stress management. I know we talked about this yesterday with your course, but so many people are going through such acute bouts of stress that are turning into chronic because of this year, right? We've all experienced ups and downs through it. I'd love if you could talk about and give people some like key practical things that they can do to regulate their allostatic load, their total stress, and just calm the chatter and chaos that is happening in a lot of people's bodies and brain.
Yeah, the way to look at it, and this is one of the aspects that I did talk about like yesterday, okay? And I said it's a little bit like your allostatic load, which is just like, for people that don't know, okay, what Alexander's talking about here is just like our stress load, okay? And that can come from many different realms, okay? It can be major life events, okay? It can be, physical trauma like injuries, okay? It can be environmental. Now, as soon as I say environmental, most of the time people think, oh, okay, so that's pollutants and chemicals. No, I'm actually talking about your surroundings, okay? Your neighborhood, okay? How people treat you, okay? That's not, at the moment, I wouldn't say that's amazing, okay? Behavioral aspects, okay? Obviously physiological, so what's going on with areas like your biochemistry, your gastrointestinal lining, your microbiome, okay? Individual differences like, that would be like gene mutations, epigenetics, ancestral, all these types of aspects, perceived stress, which, you hear me say this all the time. It's the hardest one to combat because that's limiting beliefs, that's values. And unfortunately, there's a lot of things that you're being told, which unfortunately are not necessarily true, and they're generally holding you back, okay? But you're just hanging on to them, okay? So you combine all these things, okay? And that is essentially what your allostatic load is, okay? So what people need to understand is your body's not just going to cop this, okay? Like it has to, like the body will adapt to stress. And I'm not saying this is a good thing, correct? Okay? We want the body to adapt to stress because it increases resilience, okay? But if your allostatic load is too much, okay, your body has to realign its homeostasis, okay? Especially the brain has to realign the homeostasis to be able to adjust and deal with this amount of stress, okay? And so that becomes the new norm to the body and the brain. Does that make sense? Okay, but and so these people have adjusted to that, and that would actually be a lot of the people that would turn around and say to me, they go, well, I don't feel stressed.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah, okay. And I go, yeah, but just understand, just because you don't feel stress, okay, your body has just realigned its homeostasis to adapt to that, okay? This doesn't mean this stress load is normal, okay? And then what I find also, and I talked about this with you, okay, that what you find is once you start to alleviate some of these stresses, because that has become the new homeostasis, that basically the body goes, oh, what's going on here? That's our homeostasis. That's what we're used to. And the person looks for more stress to actually apply to the body. And essentially what we need to do in that instance, when we're peeling back the layers of stress, we need to apply more restorative aspects. We need to replace it with something that's more restorative. Okay. So if I alleviate one of those big layers of the onions, okay, and you obviously know where I come from, one of those big layers would be things like gastrointestinal problems. So people with things like negative gram-bacterial overgrowth, parasites, yeast overgrowth, things like SIFO, intestinal permeability, so damage to the little mucosal cells. Okay. These are some of the, this is some of the worst stress that you can have internally in the body. Okay. And that's putting a lot of pressure on the brain, because you've got to understand a lot of the bacterial byproducts, they're causing more damage, not just to aspects like your gastrointestinal lining and your mitochondria in your cells, but also they're causing more inflammation in the brain and causing things like neuroinflammation and neurodegenerative diseases. So it's such a big layer of that allostatic load. So of course, one of the best things that I can do to alleviate some of this excess allostatic load, because the allostatic load itself is not a problem. It's just the amount of allostatic load. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Because increasing stress resilience, and we want adaptation. We need it. Yeah. Okay. It's a good thing. Okay. But when that stress load is too much, yeah, okay, that's when it can become chronic, and that's when it obviously can be causing some serious biochemical imbalances internally in the body. Okay. And so one of the big layers that you can peel back, okay, is gastrointestinal stress. Okay. Now, obviously, there's a lot within that, so I'm not going to go into all the different, and you know that, yeah, okay. But that could definitely be one of the biggest things that we could actually help to alleviate some of this current stress load that we're actually experiencing. Yeah, okay. Now, let's go into some realms that are maybe a little bit more applicable in terms of that people can start applying straight away. Yeah, okay. And remember when we started talking about the health of your neurons, okay, to actually help with things like neurotransmitters. These are brain chemicals, and they obviously help with mood regulation, behavioral traits. Yeah, okay. And from my experience, and I remember I talked about this, Alexander, we're focusing on the particular neurotransmitters, and it gets pretty complex. We're trying to focus in on serotonin, use particular supplements to help with serotonin or dopamine, and use L-tyrosine to try and increase dopamine. It just gets too fiddly for me. Well, let's just look at the neurons themselves. Yeah, okay. And remember I talked about BDNF, like brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a particular protein, okay? And there's certain things that stimulate a high production of BDNF. I just think this is more important for the trainers and the people that are listening, because there's a lot of things that we can apply immediately to start to increase more BDNF, okay? Well, first of all, let's look at the things that block it, okay? So what does BDNF do? It actually helps to repair your neurons, okay? So your neurons, okay, are made up of the axons and the dendrites, and you've got the synapses. They actually help with the uptake of neurotransmitters, okay? So that's generally like their structure, yeah, okay? And so what actually helps with the neurons, yeah, okay, is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So it actually helps to repair these neurons. It actually helps with the formation of new neurons, okay? It will actually help to repair the synapses, and if it actually helps to repair the synapses, is that going to actually help with the uptake of things like brain chemicals and neurotransmitters? Of course, yeah, okay? So a lot of amazing healing properties when it comes to this particular protein molecule. Okay, well, let's look at the things that block it, okay? So one thing that blocks it is stress, okay? So, and that can come in many different forms. I've already spoken about it, okay? And so what's really happening at the moment, Alexander, is that stress load is just too much. There's financial stress, okay? There's emotional stress. There's emotional trauma. Now already people already had things like childhood trauma and all these types of things taking place. Now on top of that, they've probably got bacterial complications. So now there's physiological stress, okay, that's coming from gastrointestinal problems and biochemical imbalances and so forth. So that stress load is huge at the moment. So is that going to potentially impair on something like brain-derived neurotrophic factor? Of course. Okay, the other thing is sugar. Now, one thing that can really come through when you've got, like, especially certain types of bacterial issues, like acetaldehyde issues, which is the byproduct from yeast and candida and SIFO and parasites. Okay. A lot of this can exacerbate your addiction profiles. Okay. So people become more addicted to things like sugar, alcohol, could be recreational drugs, okay, sex, gambling, these things get exacerbated. Okay. Well, sugar also blocks brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And then on top of that, okay, it can actually wipe out your heavy hitters against bacteria, which are the neutrophils, like white blood cells, for like 5 hours. Okay. And so that's not really going to help it when it comes to your ability to keep at bay things like secondary infections, like opportunistic bacteria. Okay. So sugar is another big factor. Okay. And the other one is, I'm sure you remember me talking about this, is isolation. Okay. And this is the most worrying thing about what's obviously taking place, because the one thing I really want to stress is we are community beings.
Yeah.
We demand it. Okay. And we thrive with it. Okay. And that's the one thing that's being really taken away from us. Okay. And we're isolating. This is definitely not good for our biochemistry. And this is definitely not good for a lot of individuals moving forward. Yeah. Okay. We need it. Okay. And I could tell you all, the things that I would really preach, okay, like food, ice therapy, breathing, okay, training, all these things, they're obviously very good for you individually, okay, but do that in a community setting, okay, and all those beneficial biochemical reactions are amplified. Yeah. They're amplified, okay? That just tells you how strong our community aspect is, okay? And if we want to look at the most definitive aspect that defines blue zone areas, and that's obviously areas in the world where they live to 80, 90, they don't get particular things like autoimmune diseases and cancer. Now they're looking at their food and they're looking at they in Okinawa, they eat this, and then in Ikaria, they eat this, and in Nagoya, they eat this, and they all essentially eat different foods, different ratios. But the one thing they've got in common is their community bonds. Strong community bonds, okay? And I'm telling you, this is really the key to their longevity, okay? And so this isolation is really taking that away, okay? And I'm telling you, on top of this, it's actually affecting our longevity as well, okay? So isolation is just so terrible when it actually comes to blocking brain-derived neurotrophic factors. So you're affecting your neurotransmitter balance, you're affecting your neurons. Now, is that going to leave you more susceptible to mood disorders, depression, anxiety, nervousness? Of course it is. Now let's look at all the things that increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Well, let's start with some of the things that are a little bit less appealing. Yeah, okay, ice therapy. Okay, but you know me, Alexander. Like out of all the tools that I use, for me, like ice therapy is probably the most multifaceted. I won't go into every single realms that it's really good for. Okay, but one is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Okay. The other aspects of things like diaphragmatic breathing. Now that can be things like box breathing, okay, Wim Hof breathing, forced hyperventilation. Okay, that's really good for brain-derived neurotrophic factor as well. Exercise increases BDNF. Okay, you look at it, things like fasting. Now make sure you're just using the right type of fasting, whether it's a 6-1 method, 5-2 method, intermittent fasting, because you just got to understand it is a stress. So you just got to make sure it's the right type of fasting for you as an individual. Don't just read some, book about fasting and all the benefits, because it might not be the right type of fasting, because once again, it's a stress and we're applying a stress to the body. You just got to make sure that you're applying that stress at the right time. Yeah, okay. So things like intermittent fasting are really good, like polyphenols, and that can come from things like green tea, olive oil. Okay. Also really other powerful like phytonutrients. Yeah. Okay. And so that can be things like curcumin. Okay, resveratrol. Okay, these are also good for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Yeah, okay, and guess what? One of the biggest things to increase BDNF, okay, is actually community.
How do you maintain strong community bonds? That's what I wanted to ask you. Like, how do you personally do it?
Look, it's definitely been harder in this environment. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, okay, but I think it's getting to a point now where we need to break the shackles. And what I mean by break the shackles, I'm not telling people to break the rules, okay? But you need to start to, whether you use technology to your advantage, okay? You start doing more, community Zoom links, okay? Do that with people around the world and do this frequently.
Yeah.
Okay? And like we really need to break that shackles of isolation, because I'm telling you, it's having such a detrimental harm to our brain and such a detrimental harm to our biochemistry.
Yeah.
Okay. And you can look at the literature. When you're in a community setting, okay, you understand you're laughing more, you're hugging more. Okay. So that human touch is really important. And I can't wait till we go back to that, because we crave it. We need it. Okay. When you hug, you produce more anti-stress hormones, anti-stress compounds like oxytocin. Yeah. Okay. There's no doubt about that. We know that. Yeah. Okay. You produce more like anti-inflammatory proteins when you do things like laugh, and you laugh frequently. What I'd also strongly advise you to do is, when you're watching Netflix, get away from the depressing, Netflix series that, it's just like doom and gloom and people killing each other and all these types of things. And why don't you just watch like a stand-up comedian? Laugh.
Yeah, The Simpsons.
Like I actually found initially that I went back to some of the, the comedy programs that used to make me laugh. Like I was a big fan of Seinfeld. I'm not going to lie.
Oh, really? Okay? Same. That's one of the best sitcoms of all time.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Watching, things like Wedding Crashers, and, like a lot of the, like I find like some of the classic sort of comedies that you can watch again, and you can pick up like bits that you just didn't actually notice the first time. But the only reason I bring this up is just like laugh more.
Yeah.
Okay. Like stop watching the news. Yeah. Okay. Like, you can keep up with it now and then, but I'm just telling you, laugh more, watch things that are going to enrich you. Okay. Watch documentaries that talk about the amazing, the amazing things that make us humans. Okay. What we're capable of. Okay. What our potential is. Okay. Watching the amazing aspects of nature. If we can't get into nature at the moment, okay, at least, watch David Attenborough. Okay, watch the like. I know this sounds all a little bit fluffy, Alexander, but I actually really believe people could be doing themselves a huge favor by just starting to watch more of these things. Okay, rather than putting themselves into more fear and more isolation and more disconnection. Yeah. Okay, because I'm telling you, from a biochemical perspective, this is really, it's not doing us any favors. Okay. And the other thing that you could easily do to actually help with the neurons. Okay. And is actually DHA. It's actually omega-3 fatty acid. So it's a polyunsaturated omega-3 fatty acid. DHA you can also get from organ meats. Okay. So this is going to make a couple of your listeners squirm. Okay. But Alexander knows I'm very big on organ meats. So things like liver, but what's really high in DHA, okay, is brains, okay, like lamb's brains. Okay, I'm an advocate of these things. I'm not telling you to eat it, okay, but I'm just telling you what it's essentially high in. Okay, but obviously you can get this from fish oil. Okay, if you're more plant-based, then you're probably going to have to get it from algae source. Okay, essentially you get it from fucoxanthin, and the fucoxanthin is converted to the DHA. But DHA makes up a high proportion. It's like 97% within the brain. Okay, you've also got about 93% in the retina. Okay, so within the eye. Okay, and also it actually makes up a big component. Okay, it actually helps with what we call grey matter. Some people might have heard of grey matter, but grey matter helps with like short-term to long-term memory. Would it be fair to say that we could be doing with a little bit of DHA at the moment? Okay, I think everyone could. Yeah, okay. So yeah, it actually helps with what they call the presynaptic membrane. Okay, the granules there. Okay, so really helping with cognition, memory. Okay, and DHA. So just like a DHA omega-3, like a fish oil. Okay. That could be really protective to actually help with the brain as well. Rather than me sit here and get into the complexity of particular neurotransmitters, because it just becomes a bit of a minefield. And I'm sure you would agree with that, Alexander.
Absolutely. And I think this is a nice place to close the conversation, especially with talking about the really practical things people can do to improve their well-being. I really loved how you touched on that and explained that. Dave, do you have any last thoughts, comments, asks of the people listening that you would want to finish with before we get up out of here?
Yeah, well, I think the question that you asked right at the start was really, like, it was a great question. Okay, is like, do we persist with the same school of thought, or do we allow more lateral thinking?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we pivot? Okay, and do we evolve? And I mean, of course, I know the answer. Okay, and we need to pivot and we need to evolve. Okay, and for strength and conditioning coaches and personal trainers, we need to get out of this mentality that this is our lane and it only comes down to sets and reps and tempo and periodization. And I'm not asking trainers and I'm not asking strength and conditioning coaches to fix ailments and conditions, but I'm telling you, okay, without understanding what's going on with someone's biochemistry, without understanding what's going on with someone's gastrointestinal tract, what bacterial issues they have, it's going to be very, very hard for you to apply the right type of stress to that particular individual, okay? And it's going to be very, very hard for you to even understand when to take away that stress to help that individual repair and recover, okay? And optimize them.
Yeah.
It's very, very hard, okay? Because just look at the human body, okay? The human body does not work in compartments, okay? Okay, we've got the brain, and the way we treated the brain, okay, we said, this is the brain, okay? And then someone else will look at the gut, okay? Someone else will look at your foot, yeah, okay? And for some reason, we said, well, the body just operates in all these different compartments, okay? Well, it doesn't. The body works in symbiosis, okay? So to understand the brain, you have to understand the gut.
Yeah.
Okay, like there's no doubt about that. Okay, to understand biomechanically, to understand what's going on with the shoulder, you have to understand what's going on with the ankle. Okay, and so for some reason we're just broken it down into compartments, and then we've had specialists in particular areas. Okay, we've got specialists in the brain, we've got specialists in the gut. Okay, without having this connection. Okay, with other axes in the body. Okay, we need to understand it all. So by understanding it all, that allows us to really apply the right types of measures to help the individual.
So become a generalist first would be your piece of advice for early coaches and trainers?
Yes. Okay. Like I think we need to become more of a generalist.
Okay.
Okay. That doesn't. So is there anything wrong with specialization? No, because I feel like we've had to go through the period of specialization to also understand, because that's allowed us to take that information. And now what we need to do is take that information to allow us to become better generalists.
Exactly. Dave, I'll let you get about your day. Every time I talk to you and have the opportunity to continue to learn and to communicate with you, I'm just so grateful there's a person like you in this, not just in this industry, but in this world that is trying to do so much good and to help so many people. So, it's a pleasure to speak to you every single time over these years, and I look forward to seeing what you and we can create continually throughout this life.
Yeah, look, I'm very honored to not just call you a mentee, okay, but you're an amazing colleague, yeah, okay, and I feel really honored to be associated with you, Alexander, and I really love the message that you're putting out there and the extent that you're going to to spread these good messages, yeah, okay, and also what you're doing to better yourself as a individual and as a trainer, okay. For anyone who doesn't know, like Alexander is he's invested so much time into education and development. It's quite phenomenal and it's quite inspiring to watch.
Thank you, Dave. That means so much coming from you. It really does. Where, to finish off, if people want to fix their health, they want to find more about you and learn more, where would you send them?
Yeah, look, probably the best thing at the moment, okay, is, you can follow me on Instagram. I don't too often say that, yeah, okay, but it's dave.o.brian, yeah, okay. Follow my message. Like, obviously, I've constructed a lot of different, protocols and products, yeah, okay. One is the gut repair, okay. It's based on the foundations of repairing the gut lining. Like, believe it or not, I have constructed a vegan and vegetarian booklet, even though I am a strong animal protein advocate, but also I want people, if they're going to make that choice, okay, I want to make sure that they're supporting themselves correctly before they just jump into the deep end without even thinking about it. Okay. And you obviously know that I'm starting to get out the message when it comes to blood markers. You're experiencing that yourself. Yeah. Okay. And I've actually developed like a blood software. Okay. And, I'm really excited about that. Yeah. Okay. And I've created a Nutrition Foundations. Okay. And Nutrition Foundations is all based on the predominant aspects that I see in blood markers. So safeguard measures you can apply to more of a general population.
Go check those out, people. Dave, thank you again, my friends. I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, thank you, Alexander. Much gratitude, mate.
And same to you.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you, Dave. Dave O'Brien, ladies and gentlemen. That is... Look, the conversation got deep, as usual, talking to Dave into the complexities of biochemistry, and that was just the foundations. Dave can really get in the weeds. If you guys have seen it on my personal podcast, Talking Chimps, if you want to find more, a 4-hour conversation on that stuff. But about Dave, basically trying to understand the principles of gut health, of brain chemistry, of the building blocks, try to really get an understanding of having that conversation for you young coaches and trainers is critically important, okay? To understand that the body works in unison, multiple dozen plus body systems working together to create optimal health. And that is the direction, we're trying to push with our course, with our Cert 3 and 4 in fitness, is basically how can we absolutely redefine and restructure and raise the standard of this industry by not just looking at sets and reps, by not just looking at strength and conditioning, right? But looking at the whole 360 of what it actually means to be a well-performing human being, right? Not just to be able to perform on the field as an athlete or just be able to lift a lot of weight or just be able to look good, but represent the external with the internal. So look good, feel good, and be good internally, okay? And that is something we definitely striving to create now, and we will be working to create and release in the future. If you guys want to know more about Orphic and what we do, if you want to be aligned with this type of vision, if this resonates with you, then we might be a good fit for you. If you are looking and you know somebody serious about becoming a coach and trainer. For Dave's stuff, I'd highly go daveobrien.com is where you guys can see a lot of that information that Dave was talking about the ebooks and the services that he offers. If you have problems with your, most people do, with your gut, with your nutrition, and you're looking for guidance, I'd highly recommend you go seek Dave out. He's one of the smartest human beings that I've ever known and met and had the pleasure to work with personally, doing protocols and consults with him. And I think if you want to dip your toe into it, then we would recommend his new ebooks and products. Especially if you're the type of person who's gone to multiple people over the years and you've been like, I can't solve this problem. I've seen this person. I think a lot of the problems is we seek specialists to solve generalist problems. We look for a gastroenterologist, or we just look for like a specialist in one specific area when we need to really zoom out and attack it from a holistic, well-rounded perspective. That is my methodology as a coach. That is Orphic's vision as a curriculum to be able to teach from this holistic perspective and touch on as many of these components as we can and as we reasonably can attack and teach. But yeah, hope that covers everything, guys. You can listen to all these podcasts on all podcast platforms, YouTube, Facebook, and you can go to orphiceducation.com to be notified about when we input or when we release these podcasts. Thank you guys so much. I'm Alexander Emanuel. If you guys want to know more about me, you can go search my name up. Otherwise, it's always a pleasure to do these, and I hope you guys enjoyed this Orphic podcast number 20 with Dave O'Brien.